So we will start the webinar. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first webinar on grassland restoration organized by the EXPBIO-Project. My name is Katrien van den Bussen. I work at the Vlaamse Landmaatschappij, the Flemish Land Agency, at the Department of Agro-Environmental Schemes. The EXPBIO-Project is funded by the EU Interreg North Sea Programme, and we are 8 partners from Sweden, Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium. We are municipalities, universities, botanical gardens, public research institutes, and governmental agencies. Our aim is to increase plant biodiversity in the North Sea region because we are all concerned about the decline of flower and insect diversity and are trying to find ways to increase this. I'm delighted to see many of you here today having interest in the subject of grassland restoration because there is a lot of work to do in restoring the plant diversity. We started the project because of what is called plant blindness, and plant blindness is the tendency that people are more focused on animals than on plants. This can have the effect that less efforts go to plant conservation. That's something we want to change with the project by showing how interesting and important plant diversity is. This spring, we held a series of webinars on seed mixtures and seed cultivation, and now we have the second webinar series focusing on grassland restoration. 6 speakers will share their latest insights on how we can rediversify the grasslands in Northwest Europe. I'm very grateful that Hans de Kroon is today here for the first webinar to talk about restoring species-rich grasslands on dike in the Netherlands, and I'm sure we will all learn a lot from his experience. Hans de Kroon is a professor of plant ecology at the Radboud University in Nijmegen, the Netherlands, and his work focuses on plant interactions and biodiversity mechanisms, particularly in grasslands. He has developed experimental facilities to study the mechanisms of root interactions below ground, and since about 10 years he's working with the Dutch waterboards on grassland of dikes with the aim to enhance grassland biodiversity with new seed mixtures, soil improvement and management experiments. This webinar will last 1 hour, 30 to 40 minutes for the presentation and the rest of the time for discussion and questions. So some technical issues, we asked to mute your microphone and we used to adjust the chat for communication and discussion. So with that, I hand over to you, Hans.
Thank you, Katrien. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm looking forward to present our work and to have some discussion and perhaps be able to answer some questions where you're dealing with. Cornelia, could you put the presentation on screen, please?
Yes, let's do that.
There we go. There's the first slide, restoring species-rich grasslands on dikes. You can see a lot of logos here. The work that I'm presenting is really work with a whole group of people, and some of my colleagues here at the university, with companies, and with the water boards, and some other universities as well, as you can see here. It's really a team effort I would like to emphasize. Now, on the next slide is a slide that is my source of inspiration. I'm working basically on grasslands the whole of my scientific life, and these are very special grasslands. This is a calcareous grassland in the south of our country, South Limburg, which is a small area in between Belgium and Germany on calcareous soils. And these grasslands are the grasslands where I did my PhD work a very long time ago. Now, this is a picture from early spring, that you can see, and it doesn't seem to look as a grasslands with a lot of diversity. But if you start looking around, and you can see that on the next slide, you will actually find a lot of, next slide, Gunilla. You can actually see a lot of species already here, and I really like to start looking around, see what I can find, and also here I let you be familiar with some nice Dutch names as well, but I'm sure many of you will recognize the species. Some of them are actually quite rare for our country, very special already in early spring. Now, next slide, same grassland, but then about 2 months later, in June, and you can see it has a completely different appearance. Now we see next to some green of the grasses, we see particularly yellow and purple, and two very special species are very prominent here, and you can see that on the next slide with some detailed pictures. An orchid and a rattle as a hemiparasite. It's a very special place. Next slide, a little detail again of early spring of the grassland. This is a grassland, one of the most species-rich grasslands in the world, up to about 50 plant species per meter square. That is very, very exceptional. Although you wouldn't say it if you see it, but if you look very carefully, you will see leaves of all different kinds of forms, indicating there are many different species growing together. Now, these grasslands are around already for hundreds of years. They've been sheep grazed for many times. They are mown right now, usually only once a year, very shallow soil. And this is my reference site. This is my source of inspiration. Why cannot we have these grasslands at many more places? Now, the solution for the diversity that we see here on the next slide is below ground. Here a few grasses that a few species that we work with, including their root systems. And I think you can already see a little bit here from the grasses and the forbs that are collected here, that also the root systems are very different. And we've been working with these root systems now for about 20 years, almost 25 years. We know they are very different, and we know that there are interactions below ground eventually are very important for what is happening above ground and how they coexist with each other. Now I could show a lot of results, but let me show just one thing that we found in a very big experiment. On the next slide, you can see an experiment, a very big biodiversity experiment in Jena. And in this Jena experiment, you can see it from the aerial picture. There are plots with different compositions, sometimes only a monoculture, one species, up to 2, 4, and up to 16 different species together. Well, we did a lot of measurements over there, and you can see it in the graph here that the more species you get, the higher the biomass, and that is true above ground, but it's also true below ground. Actually, the 16 species has 2 to 3 times as much biomass than the average of all the monocultures, and that is quite exceptional. You wouldn't necessarily expect that. There are all sorts of reasons for it that I could discuss. That is also part of my research. But when this became apparent, and we found that in experiments in Nijmegen and in many other places, I thought it was time to get in touch with the water boards, because on the next slide, we can see there are dike grasslands that some of them look like this. This is actually a very nice grassland area, very close to where I live in Nijmegen. It's a dike along the river Waal, the river, basically the main branch of the Rhine in our country. It's very species rich, full of flowers, developed over the last 25, 30 years or so. These grasslands on dikes are quite rare, and we thought, if they have better rooting, it actually leads to a better, stronger cover of the dike, and this could be actually very profitable also for the waterboards who are involved with the quality of the dikes. Now, we started a research project that you can see right here, Future Dikes, to investigate a few things, whether that's what we found in our experiments really holds in reality. And on the next slide, you can see what our primary questions were. So we think that species richness, the root density, and how strong the dikes are, how the erosion resistance are positively related. That is what we wanted to know. But you can see here in the middle, substrate and management, it really depends also on what kind of soils you are. And it will also depend on what kind of management you have. And I will come back to that. Now, initially in this project, next slides and again, the next slide, we want to use this information to develop new seed mixtures that promote this relationship and promote biodiversity as well as work on erosion models and see whether they are really strong. So to put this in a figure on the next slide, we think these three things are related. You can see them here on the axis. Now think of a construction of a dike, and then over many years the vegetation develops. What we think is with our information, we could provide three different things. One, next slide, is to enhance the root development. See whether with good seed mixtures we can make sure that we have much quicker and interesting grass cover. Next slide, give more strength to the rooting. And finally, the next one is to prolong the life cycle of the dikes. You know, if we have calcareous grasslands that hold on for hundreds of years, we should be able to prolong the life cycle of the vegetation here as well. And this will be very much to the profit of the waterboards as well. Now, the first thing we did is make an inventory of the species-rich dikes. So you can see a few pictures on the next slide there. The result of work of the person you see here in the field, my partner Cyril Liebrand, working on dikes already for something like 30 years. And most of the dikes here, the green spots are particularly here in the middle along the Maas and the Rhine, where it comes into our country. The dikes along the coast, along the big lakes, are much less species rich. What did we do? You see a few pictures here. We have a nice device to see how strong the dikes are. We're looking at the rooting as well with soil cores and investigate them. Now, looking at this in total, on the next slide, you can see a very nice species-rich dike along the River Maas. We define a species-rich dike grassland with a minimum of 30 plant species on an area of 5 by 5 meters, of which a minimum of 20 herb species are present and about 10 grass species are present. This is sort of the rule of thumb for us. You can see this is less species-rich than the calcareous grassland, but still it is a very interesting vegetation, also with some rare species, including in here. So that is sort of, you know, the kind of target that we go. You know, it says minimum of 30 plant species. I think the highest number that we had is about 50 to 60 plant species on an area of 5 by 5. Now, if we can make a little sidestep, although we are focusing on botanical diversity and plant blindness, we are also not blind to what is flying around. On the next slide, you can see an impression. This is a grassland that really delivers. Here in a Dutch newspaper covering our work, it says, flower-rich dikes helps nature. We can see a lot of wild bees, for example, butterflies on the dikes. And actually, I have a PhD student who has been looking at the wild bees on dikes. You can see him in the next slide doing his work. Constant is his name. And if you think about species-rich grasslands, you think of food for insects. You know, you think of pollen and nectar. But it was very important also is to have nesting sites. Most bees, actually, wild bees, nest in the ground. And what Constant did, together with his partners, is to make an inventory of the wild bees on dikes across the country, from the coast up to the border with Germany, identifying more than 10,000 different specimens of wild bees. Now, a brief impression on the next slide. You can see what he found. He just published his results with two very nice examples right here. Our estimate is about half of all the wild bee species in the Netherlands can actually be found on dikes, including many red list species. And this is exceptional. Although it's a long stretch, they are elongated stretches, the total area is not all that much. And what is also interesting, and you can see that here in the figures, is if you increase flower species richness, so, even moderately diverse dikes already harbor quite a few species and quite a few number, in this case of bumblebees and solitary bees. You can see these lines go up really quickly. So it really, it helps botanical diversity, but it really also helps the insects that can also use the dikes to move around in the landscape. And it's really this combination that I think we should really go for. All right, that's my side step of the wild bees. Let's move back to our plants on the next slide. So here we have the previous picture. It's a flower-rich dike along the River Maas, and how nice it is. What we have to show, first of all, in our country, is that the dike is safe. I think most of you realize about 1/3 of the country, of my country, is below sea level. Water safety is always number one if you work with dike managers. Now, can these delicate flowers protect us from high water? On the next slide, you can see how we tested that. Here we have a device that was specially, yes, the next one will click will run the video, I think. What we actually do is simulate an overflooding. So there are really big loads of water flooded over the vegetation. What you can see here, there's no flower seen because this is typically done in the middle of the winter. In the middle of the winter, the vegetation is usually most sensitive. What this device is doing is repeated floods, first, let's say, small ones, then really, really big ones. And basically what they measure is when does the cover break? When you get really damage? And then they know how safe the dike is because they can calculate how much pressure there has been cumulatively on the dike. Now, that is quite impressive. For the next slide, you can see a detailed. This is how it looks like. It looks like very delicate plants. I visited all these tests. At some point, you can't see a single grain of sand anymore. You can only see roots and the remains of plants. And we were of course very interested. Are they really holding this enormous pressure? And you can see on the next slide how it looked like after the tests. Basically, hardly any damage happened. And this was really a surprise to our engineers. They didn't expect these dikes to be that strong. On the left part, you can see that sometimes you see that some of the cover is actually washed away. But then there was a big thick layer of roots that actually was stopping further damage. And in most cases, you can see that here in the middle, there was hardly any damage at all. So this really came as a surprise to the engineers, and was crucial for us to continue our work on flower dikes. So on the next slide, these are very spectacular tests. As you can see here, you can see one of these big washes coming down. This photographer really got completely wet, but he made a nice picture, so we're happy with that. This article in one of our Dutch newspapers says, the flower dike proves its safety, and that's exactly what it did. So we were very happy with this. Now, these tests were done, the water boards and our water protection program, water safety program, they said, well, if flower dikes are that strong, well, we should go for it. I mean, then they should become the standard, really, because, we can really, they're much nicer to see. They protect biodiversity and they are safe. Well, this is a win-win situation. Let's go for it. And that was a very important turning point. So on the next slide, where we see another nice flower dike, very close to the German border. And on the next slide, we can see that summary of the first phase of our project. With the conclusion that flower dikes are safe, they contribute to biodiversity, and I'll get to that in a minute, we have first seed mixture compositions ready for application. Are we there yet? Okay, this was a very important step in our project, but this is only the beginning, because, beautiful dikes that you see here in this picture is not something that you can get right away. We really needed a second phase, and you can see this in the nice, the next picture, another beautiful dike not too far from where I live. The next slide. Here are some beautiful details, as you can see. How can we now really develop dikes like this that are really cover a lot of botanical diversity and are safe at the same time? Well, we'll have to work with dike managers and make them familiar with how to do this. And here you see the questions of our next phase. On the next click, please. It's really on management and climate adaptation. So how to develop these flower dikes, how to transform regular dikes to flower dikes. How can we do that? And what flower dikes are best adapted to climate change? Another very important question that we'll get to. And here is an important point. Creating dikes like this, restoring grasslands that look like this, is not something that you can do overnight. It's not a matter of seeding and then you are there. These vegetations need time to develop. They are not there just by seeding and that's it. The soil has to develop, the plants will have to settle, there's a full cycle that they have to go through with reseeding, and it really takes a while. So for everybody working on this, I would say manage your expectations. And we say that to the dike managers as well. You start seeding and you will need a few years to guide the process in order to get eventually vegetation that looks like this. Now, it all starts with the right seed mixtures. On the next slide, you can see one part of the mixtures that we are using. These are typically the grass species. In this case, there are 9 grasses, usually together with some white clover, that we have developed together with the seed company Kruidhoek, who is very eager to develop these mixtures. Now, this is already quite a change from the traditional management, because on the next slide you can see that what the classical dike seed mixture was only these 3. Particularly ryegrass, lowly and perennial, was used a lot in these mixtures because it grows very rapidly and it leads to immediate green homogeneous cover. That's what dike managers like. And then, the world is very simple. But if you work with a lot of other species, you have more opportunities. But it also leads to patterns that are, let's say, less clear to describe. Now, these are only the grasses. And on the next slide, you can see the standard mixture for the herbs. For the time being, we selected 22 different species that you can see right here. Typically dike species that occur on many different flower dikes. Sometimes some species are more prominent, sometimes others are more prominent. They do not necessarily all occur at the same time. And 6 of them are legumes, and the legumes are, of course, as you know, they have a special role, and they also have a special role in establishing the new dike vegetations here. So these, based on our current understanding, you can easily use these mixtures, and they are already used quite a lot. But this is not the full story. And on the next slide, I make it slightly more complicated, slightly more interesting as well, as you can see right here. What you see here is 3 columns. The 3 columns move from the left with really a sandy soil to the right to a heavy clayey soil. Now you can see on the pictograms that the soil structure is very different. Clay, very fine particles, sand, very rough particles, and in between, the more lutum-rich soils, you have something in between. And you can already see it here in the pictograms. Most opportunity for restoring grasslands is really in the middle. This is what we found on the basis of thousands of relevees of dikes. This is the pattern that came out. And you can see there, you can see percentage lutum. So this is the composition of the soil. If that is really there in the middle, you have the best opportunities. It also has a moderately high organic matter content. And that really gives the best chances. That's where to go for. And in those opportunities, you have the best rooting and also the best protection from the rooting. As far as dike protection is concerned. Now, the chances of going to a very sandy soil, you can see perhaps that a little bit in the picture in the left. You can have very open grasslands, and that is almost a no-go thing on the dikes. The grasslands need to be really closed. If you get open spots, they're very vulnerable for erosion. On the other hand, if you go to the heavy clay soil, they can dry out and you can have these crevices that you can see on that picture. So that is not necessarily the thing to go for. So everybody working with species-rich grassland and dike, species-rich grasslands, dike or grassland restoration, botanical restoration, try to have an impression of what kind of soils you're working with, because the soils will be very, very important in what you're going to get. On dikes, they're crucial. They're because we're working with water protection, but I think they're very important in any cases. So in order to move along this transect, there's actually a separate seed mixture for more sandy soils, using particularly species that are better adapted to the more sandy soils. And this is not something, we invented. These are all native species. These are well thought of, but then they have a higher element of these sandy soils. All right. So very nice. We have a dike mixture for grasses, we have a dike mixture for the herbs, but we are really interested, what do all these different species do, and can these seed mixtures be optimized? Now, on the next picture, you can see what we are doing in that direction. Here's my other PhD student, Steven, and he is looking in the glass house, growing nearly 50 plant species. We are looking at the rooting, and we are looking at mixtures. The person he was joining him, he has a very nice suit, as you can see. He is actually the Delta Commissioner on water safety in the Netherlands. He's a very important person. He's really responsible for all the water safety measures, and he's very supportive of our species-rich dikes. So he came immediately to have a look at our experiments. That was really nice to have such a supporter who was that influential. Now, what Steven has done is to make miniature dikes. You can see that here in the drone picture on the right. we have 4 miniature dikes where we are actually testing different seed mixtures and see what they are doing. And we're testing 10 different mixtures in this case. And in the next picture, you can see what the idea behind it is. So we're not using the basic mixtures that I just showed. It's very good that they're used in the field, but we are starting with what is called D2 here. These are these 3 grass mixtures that are sort of standard already for 50 years in dike management. Then we're adding grasses. So with 2, 4, and 6 different, 2, 4, and 8 different species. We're adding herbs. 4, 8, and 16 different herbs, and we're adding grasses plus herbs in different mixtures. So we have 10 different seed mixtures in total. And what we're interested in is exactly to answer the questions that I posed in the beginning. How can you create more rapidly a very nice dike grassland with so many species that you're really restoring botanical diversity, but also creating opportunities for other species to invade and to increase biodiversity. So this is what we are testing at the moment. On the next slide, you can see what we are doing. This is how the miniature dikes look like. The dike is really a dike, but it's in a very small form. It has exactly the substrate. It has exactly the slope of a real dike. We really made sure that everything was exactly in order. It's a lot of work. Here, my partner Erik Visser, that you see there, is making a vegetation releve to see what species actually came up. And Steven is actually harvesting and selecting the different plant species, weighing them and looking very carefully in how these vegetations develop. On the next slide, you can see we're also looking below ground. We actually have tubes in here, transparent tubes. You can see that here in the pictogram. And in these transparent tubes, we put a scanner. You can see Steven is doing that right here to measure the roots. The roots make an image on the tube. So we can follow through time the development of the vegetation above ground and below ground to see how these things are going. Now, there's one element also that we're testing, and you can see that in the next slide, and that probably doesn't come as a surprise to many of you. Particularly in the summer of 2018 was extremely hot and dry, and many dikes looked like this. The sheep stands on the top of the dike, but it doesn't really know what to do because it's completely deranged from its natural environment. There's no green leaf left to eat. Interestingly, on dikes where there were herbs, and you can see that on the inset here, the herbs stay green for longer, probably because they root deeper and they are better able to resist the drought. But the climate is changing. A few years later, we had actually a summer flood with when the plants were in full flower. The River Maas really had very, very high water levels. I'm sure you can recognize there was big floods in Germany in particular, and in the Ardennes region in Belgium. And we are collecting some of that water, and we had a very different situation. So what we are doing on the test dikes, next slide, you can see that, is actually we're testing drought. So we have covers that you can see here on the left over the dike to create a drought situation. We did this last year for about 10 weeks, and on the detailed picture you can see there's some wilting of the plants, but they're still green. The path in between where we have only grasses, everything is already dead, so they can really withstand quite a bit of drought. And we've repeated the drought this year. Now, the next slide is you can see how they looked in July. So this is again after, so repeated drought after 8 years, and it seemed that almost everything was dead. It was completely yellow, except, as you can see on the picture, some herbs stayed green. This is exactly what we observed in 2018. I should confess, I was really a bit scared when I saw this. And I said to Steven, we just can't continue like this. Maybe we're going to kill everything. So after another 8 weeks of drought, we stopped the experiment, watered them also in line with the watering outside. And on the next picture, you can see what the result was after, I think, about 6 weeks or 8 weeks. What was it? 7 weeks. After 7 weeks, after 4 weeks of watering. And you can see that, the plants recover very, very quickly. The recovery is really good, but look at the differences. The D2 control, only 3 grasses, very poor recovery of the drought, and you can only see some herbs that invaded were the ones that actually grew out. Now with 16 herbs, some of the herbs grew very well, but you don't have a closed vegetation. There's still some very open spots. Surprisingly, a little bit, the 8 grasses did actually quite well, and the best recovery was with the herbs and the grasses together. You can see it here on the right. Well, the whole team now is harvesting this experiment. We also followed, of course, the root development below ground. But the first impression was very clear that if we have a more higher botanical diversity, the grassland will much better withstand the drought. They dry out, but they are certainly much better in the recovery. Now, these kinds of experiments that we are doing here, we are also repeating on the dikes themselves. The next slide, we see work of Thomas. Thomas is another PhD student of mine, and he's doing a lot of experiments on actual dikes. And one of the things that he's doing is really look at the effects of the soil, and also works on soil improvement that you can see right here. This is one of the many pilots that he has here. You can see where some stretches are prepared for his experiment, in which he has delivered compost on a fairly sandy dike and combined it with a control measure. And then you can see here on the picture, DBG is that there he's sown only the grasses. He has also sown grasses plus herbs, and then he saw the grasses with only some of the species that we see in our experiment is doing best. So you must realize this is what we are seeding. We are following these pilots, of course, in the coming years to see what is coming up and how the vegetation is developing. And to repeat what I said before, you cannot seed everything that in the end will appear. You will lose some species, but you will gain some species as well. It's also creating the right conditions. Be patient, have the right management. Now, management is another thing that we are experimenting with this. Usually young dikes with a rich soil are mown twice a year, one early and one after seed set. When they're completely developed, we generally are mowing once a year. And the rule of thumb is not before 15th of June, so that there is at least some basic seed set done in here. Again, there's not one single solution. It really depends on the kind of soil you have and how quickly the plants are developing. You cannot just have one single measure by which we get the best development. It's really keep your eyes open, do some measurements, and follow, for example, the flowering and the seed set. That is the best way to develop the best species-rich mixtures. Now, to conclude, next slide. I think our project will develop some optimal seed mixtures, mixture that will do very well. We are able to develop towards really good species-rich mixtures. The soil improvement is an interesting one. Sometimes you don't want to improve the soil, but then, I think our work will show what you can get at the different soils, from very sandy to very clay soils. And we will combine that with the management regime. We're not in favor of the grazing, the sheep grazing. We really advocate the mowing, and fortunately the water boards are taking that over. Now, what are our challenges? And maybe this is a surprise to some of you. I think the main challenge is to share experiences. The main challenge is to familiarize all those people who are responsible for the grasslands, also in the areas where you are working, with new mixtures and new management. It is really important to do that, because we from our university, we're not going to sow all the grasslands. The dike managers will have to do that. So we share experiences. And for example, the experiment that we have on campus that you can see right here, we had a dike managers meeting this summer with a lot of interest. They're really interested in seeing what is happening here and how they can use it. So you have to develop some toolboxes for people to work with. And this could also be in municipalities or, any other places where all of you are working, but also create trust, give room to experimentation, monitor feedback, and really follow what's going on. It's very nice to start seeding experiments, but it's really only the start. Really follow it in the years after that. And then you will get somewhere. And that, I think, to do that in a proper way, I think, is actually the main challenge in developing and restoring botanical diversity. And then with one slide left, I would like to thank you for your attention. And here you can see me standing quite proud on a very nice dike, not too far from where I live. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hans, for the interesting presentation. I see there are some questions in the chat. If someone else has questions, just put it in the chat. I also have a question, Hans. What do you see as the most important barrier to tackle in the short run? And what could be important to focus in the long run to have more flourish dikes?
Well, the most important thing to tackle is to do the pilots. We do that in EXPBIO, for example. We have a lot of pilots in very different ways. Do the pilots, involve people, create interest, make mistakes, and really follow what's going on. That is the most important thing. And in the long run, as I said, create opportunities for people really in charge to join in, share your fascination for botanical restoration, and get the people involved. That is really the most important thing.
Thank you. I will go to the chat. So the first question, do you have any thoughts about how to manage the risk of erosion during the establishment phase?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. And water boards are very concerned about that. In regular dikes with regular mixtures, it takes 4 or 5 years before the dike is at strength. And if we can shorten that with, say, 2 years or so, they would already be very happy. What we're thinking of, and we're testing that, is there's usually a sort of a succession of species. In the beginning, there are some fast-growing species that establish, but they are not going to hang out or stay for a long time, and they're gradually replaced by others. Now, also in my profession, there's quite a bit of work done on those successional stages, and we hope to apply them in such a way that we can actually sort of, create the strength quite soon, but at the same time have developed to really the botanical diversity that we're aiming at. And this is work in progress. I don't have the final answer to that yet, but that is what we are aiming for.
So the next question, how do the flower dikes compare to traditionally managed all grass wards with multiple mowing annually? And how are the concerns about inspections overcome due to inability to inspect because of the taller sward and potential for unseen burrowing animals?
Yeah, burrowing animals are really a concern. It is increasing, and what we see right now is that probably dikes become vulnerable when there is a lot of animal activity on the dike. Dike managers, as the rules are right now, is they really want to have short cover. You have to be mown. They want to really keep it as a grassland to be able to inspect the dike. If there are major damages and there's a tall vegetation, they cannot see it. And that's fine. That combines very well with maintaining a species-rich grassland.
And has there been research into speeding establishment using mycorrhizal inoculations?
Yeah, I'm not even sure whether that's true. Not that I'm aware of at the moment. And the question, of course, is mycorrhizal association the bottleneck in this? What we do advise is use, when there's a new dike construction, use a living soil, preferably soil that was already there, put in depot and put back on, because then you already have quite a mixture of mycorrhizal species that could be very well sufficient. For the time being, I don't think we see mycorrhizal limitations here in the establishment.
And then do you collect the arising following mowings?
Sorry, do we collect?
The arisings following mowing.
The material that is collected, is that?
Maybe the person that asked the question can explain it a bit.
I think she's.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, is that you, Siri?
No, I was just going to say the same as you. I think she's gone off the call. It's I had the same question. It's collecting up the
cut
cuttings,
material,
so it doesn't rot down, and you put more nutrients in, and then you lose the.
Yeah, it is very important that the mown grasses are, let's say, collected after a few days, so that the insects can disappear and the seeds can disperse and fall down, but not longer. There are ways of mowing, I'm not sure what the English name for it is, where the mown material is left and the grasses suffocate. And that is really detrimental to flower rich vegetation. A few strong grasses will be able to survive and grow out, and that's it. Sometimes, because it's cheaper, it is done in that way. But we really recommend not to do so. Now, collecting of the say the forage, the grass, is that the material that comes out. That is another thing. We really would like to involve farmers that can use it as hay. It's actually hay of very good quality. It has herbs. Cows really like it. Much better than only the grass itself. There are other ways to use it. There's a bokashi method to actually fermentize the material and use it as a fertilizer, either to bring it back on the dike if the dike is quite poor, or to use it elsewhere. But much better than to use it as waste, because this is very useful and very interesting material. So, but we're still working on that, and that really would help the development of creating these species-rich dikes if you do it that way.
So a question referring to the first question, the flower dikes are safe, but how does that safety compare with the less diverse swards?
Oh, what happens is that, you know, let's say the ultimate safety of the dike is in Holland is a big, thick clay layer, the heaviest clay that you can think of. So almost all the dikes, and we can do that in our area of Europe, there's a lot of clay or sufficient amount of clay, is that, you know, there's a thick layer of clay of say 0.5 meter or more, that's slightly deeper, and that's the ultimate protection. Now, if you have such clay in the top layer, you know, you only get a few species. It's really not interesting, and that would be fine for if you want to, you know, have sheep on them. What we see is that if you have that top layer less clay with more species, it's the grass roots and the roots of the herbs that actually give the protection. And that is the interesting combination there. And then these dikes are as safe as the, you know, the dikes with the most heavy clay. So it's really interesting to see how, you know, we can let the plants and the flowers work for safety.
So another question about if you have compared the sheep grazing to mowing in management, because in northern West Germany, sheep grazing is still the gold standard.
Yeah.
And now they are going to grazing by cows because it's cheaper.
Yeah. We've had a discussion as well. Cow grazing in Holland is almost absent because cows are too tall. They can really damage the top. They create open spots. So you never see cows on dikes, but you do traditionally saw always sheep on dike. And the dikes along the coast, the northern coast, it's still very common to have sheep grazing. Now, as soon as you have sheep grazing, certainly almost year-round sheep grazing, what we see right there are few opportunities for botanical restoration. Sheep are very smart. You know, cows are, you know, they just eat everything when it becomes in front of their big mouth. But sheep are very selective. You know, they pick up the herbs, particularly the nice herbs first, and that gives few opportunities. Sometimes the combination is used, and there are some experiments done on that in which you don't have year-round grazing, but only selective grazing. Sometimes early in the season, sometimes later in the season. And this can be combined with also mowing ones. And that can give actually quite nice opportunities, although there are not too many experiments done. So, but I would not recommend year-round sheep grazing if restoring botanical diversity is what you would like to achieve.
Another question about the difference between mowing and grazing. Yeah, I think you answered most of it already. The seed dispersal while grazing. Then the next question, I think you told about inoculation of hay when we visited one of your dikes.
Yeah.
How much do you use that, and do you remove that hay when the seeds have dropped off?
Yeah, that is sometimes done in this way. You can use these seed mixtures. We are developing them as I showed. Sometimes also, if you have a very nice grassland, you can collect the hay, not leave it, but really collect it and bring the seeds elsewhere by dropping it. You don't want to keep the hay there. You really want to make sure that the seeds are spread. And there are some good results done on that for sure. Yeah, so that it depends also a little bit on what you have available. There are different ways of doing it.
Have experiments already been conducted that simulate a flood after an intense dry period?
Not really. Yeah, that's a very interesting thing. And actually, the water boards were really interested. They really concerned that if you have repeated droughts, that eventually, you know, the strength is going down quite a bit. And yeah, then you would have to do a flooding to really test. Now, having said that, we are doing elaborate measurements on the drought effects. We know how important the routing is for the dike safety, so we are trying to tie these two things together and calculate what, you know, repeated droughts and a reduction in the routing really means for the dike safety. Although we don't test it, we do have models that can actually make those calculations. So that is, for the time being, what we are trying to accomplish very soon now.
And then do you apply specific methods for phosphorus management in the soil?
No. Phosphorus is generally not the limiting factor in the soils that we are working with. You know, moving in that along that gradient from very sandy to very clay soils, it's a combination of nitrogen and phosphorus as the macronutrients that make the difference. But in our country, we don't have really soils that are particularly poor in phosphorus, so we don't have it in that way.
Do you always start from bare ground before sowing? Could it also be efficient to sow the mixture directly on the existing lawn?
Yeah, these are what Thomas is trying out in the last pictures that I've shown. You will have to. So we have a set of pilots in which we are seeding in established vegetation. Our recommendation is cut it very, very low, making sure the plants stay alive, but cut it very, very low in let's say late autumn. We use it, you know, open the soil just a little bit so that it, you know, you can really have some bare soil, then seed it and roll it. And then you have the right combination, and hopefully you have some rain. The last year, it was such a dry spring that we actually had to reseed almost all our pilots because there was not enough rain. So it's a combination of those factors, but you will have to do a little bit. If you have a standing vegetation and you just seed it, it's probably useless. It will not bring you much further. You'll have to do some treatments in advance, and you can really move towards a more species-rich grassland in that way. That's
okay,
a good.
That was the last question.
Yep.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Hans Kroon. It was a very interesting presentation.
Mm-hmm.
So next week we will listen to Anne de Schrijver on the subject of restoring species-rich grassland from science to practice. If you would like to attend, please register for each webinar. All the webinars will be recorded and can later be seen on the webpage of EXPBIO. After this whole webinar series is accomplished, you will receive an email questionnaire on reflections and learnings. So we kindly ask you, please take your time to fill it in, as it really helps us to make a roadmap for recommendations of future steps for biodiversity. So your answers are very important to us. Mm-hmm. If there are any remaining thoughts to share, please use the chat for another few minutes and we will check it afterwards. Mm-hmm. So on behalf of the entire EXPBIO team, I would like to thank you all for joining us, and you're welcome to the coming webinars.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.